Good Wednesday afternoon on this August 31st. This is your tropical weather update for 28storms.com and the Hurricane Tracker app. We are still monitoring Tropical Storm Katilla, located out here in the central Atlantic. I was a bit surprised that it didn't quite become a hurricane just yet, but it's really on the cusp now at 70 miles per hour. It's more than likely going to be a hurricane very soon. But more importantly, and the more imminent threat, will be 93 out invest. This is a disturbance just declared by the Hurricane Center. They have increased the chance of development within the next 48 hours to 30%, and these probabilities will definitely increase as this tropical disturbance moves more toward the northwest Gulf of Mexico. Since this disturbance has been classified as an invest, we now have a little bit better microwave satellite imagery to go by, along with some additional model guidance. And this was a microwave satellite pass taken earlier this afternoon. You can make out the Yucatan Peninsula, but here's our developing tropical disturbance in the southeast Gulf of Mexico. We can already see signs of a potential low-level circulation trying to get its act together. However, nothing is well defined just yet. And this was an ASCAT satellite image taken late this morning at around 10 a.m. local time here along the central Gulf Coast. We can see an easily well-defined tropical wave axis extending from the northern Yucatan all the way well into the northeast Gulf of Mexico. If there is going to be any low-level circulation try to develop over the next 12 hours, it's going to be somewhere around here where we see the wind vectors pointing out of the southeast initially, and then all of a sudden we get some east-northeast winds up here. So right around this area is where we're going to have to keep a very close watch on for any signs of tropical development. In addition to satellite imagery, we can also observe some of the latest surface observations taken across the Gulf of Mexico, and they aren't as plentiful as we would like them to be, but you can still make out the broad cyclonic rotation that is beginning to take shape across much of the eastern and central Gulf. We are now looking at the broad visible satellite animation for the Gulf of Mexico, and of course here again is our tropical wave trying to really get its act together here. If I turn on some of the latitude and longitude coordinates, we can make out that the potential low-level circulation is developing right around 24 degrees north and 86 degrees west. And also notice how the system at the moment is lopsided, with much of that convection occurring just to the east of the tropical wave axis. And we can also observe that on the latest infrared imagery. As you can see, there is a fairly sharp cutoff between strong convection and really not much in the way of any precipitation. And we can see the reason behind that a little bit better on the latest water vapor imagery. You can get the general idea that there is still quite a lot of southwest wind shear, especially over the western and central Gulf of Mexico. And that wind shear is aiding in the convective development, but it's not going to help the development of a true tropical system. And this is where the mention of a subtropical storm comes into play. This was mentioned in the Hurricane Center Outlook. As we look a little bit more toward the north, we see that there is a mid to upper level trough draped across much of the northern Gulf from the Florida Panhandle to the Texas coastline. And if we look even closer, just to the south of Mobile, Alabama, we do see a very weak mid to upper level low, which is not fully tropical in nature. And this non-tropical upper level low is aiding in that convection, like we said before, and therefore this system could at least have some subtropical characteristics. Now, if the upper level pattern does become a little bit more favorable, with upper level ridging beginning to expand out of the northwest Caribbean and into the Gulf of Mexico, then we could see some true tropical development under very light upper level winds, and the system would develop its own inner core. But that remains to be seen. Either way, it still looks like we will definitely be dealing with a tropical cyclone of some sorts. Whether or not it's fully tropical, again, we will just have to wait and see. But all interests from Texas all the way through the Florida Panhandle should be keeping a very close eye on this system, and it very well could be impacting the weather across much of the coast as we go into the Labor Day weekend. According to the SIMS 850 millibar vorticity analysis, we are beginning to see a little bit more concentration in around that same location that we would be looking for on visible satellite for any type of low-level circulation. So this is just another indication that our invest is gradually becoming better defined. If you look at the latest wind shear analysis, here again is that upper level ridging that is oriented a bit more toward the southeast of our developing system. And again, we still have a lot of southwest wind shear just to the north of that upper level ridge. You can perhaps see this a little bit better on the color representation. Again, this is the center of the upper level ridge, with wind shear values generally less than 10 to 15 knots. But again, just to the north, we have shear in excess of about 20 to 25 knots. And we will have to very carefully look at whether or not this upper level ridge begins to extend more toward the north, which could mean more favorable conditions. Either way, it's looking like a subtropical storm at the very least is going to form and be impacting much of the northwest Gulf of Mexico. The latest low-level steering winds would also indicate that this tropical disturbance will continue to move more toward the northwest over the next 24 to 36 hours, so we can expect that this system will be organizing just to the south of the Louisiana coast. Now, if this pattern were to persist, then this system would have no trouble continuing west-northwest bound toward the Texas coastline, and that is a legitimate possibility, but there are quite a lot of model members that are also weakening the mid to low-level ridge over much of the central Gulf Coast states, and that could act to weaken the steering currents and therefore allow the system to stall very close to the U.S. coastline. This map shows us a spaghetti model plot of some of the tropical models. Now keep in mind the tropical models are certainly not our best models, and this is the first run from them. And as you can see, especially if this storm were to stall, then this is going to be a very tricky system to forecast, and already we have quite a model spread with tracks ranging anywhere from Brownsville, Texas, eastward to Pensacola, Florida. If we begin to look at some of the more dynamical model guidance that has come out this afternoon, we'll start off with the 12Z CMC, and this is our developing tropical disturbance in the southeast Gulf of Mexico. And as we steadily advance this into the second half of the week and into the weekend, notice by 54 hours the system is really beginning to get its act together to the south of Lake Charles. And as we go into the 72-hour time frame into 78 hours, so we're talking about Saturday morning and Saturday afternoon, we have at least a tropical storm making landfall along the upper Texas coast between Houston and Galveston, Texas. So this would be a very straightforward forecast. The model is still showing a weakness in that ridge to the north along the central Gulf Coast, with a small pocket here along Texas for this system to ride into. But notice that even on the CMC model, the storm is in no hurry to go anywhere once it makes landfall. The ridge to the north begins to break down due to this trough beginning to come down from the Midwest states. And actually, the storm is left behind here by that trough, and we still have some ridging over much of the Four Corners area, and the CMC is indicating that this ridge will begin to push our system back toward the southwest. So if this model solution were to verify, then this would be very beneficial rain for much of southeast Texas, but of course we don't want it to come all at once, because then we would still have some flooding concerns, and there is the potential for this system to be a bit lopsided with much of its convection just to the east. So this would be a potential flood concern not only for portions of southeast Texas, but also much of lower Louisiana. Now, this is very difficult to point out, but the GFS leads me to believe that the upper level environment will become steadily more favorable for at least some tropical development. So this system may start off as a subtropical system, or at least have some subtropical characteristics, before becoming a little bit more tropical as it gets into the northern Gulf of Mexico. This is the current upper level forecast pattern, and we still see those southwest winds aloft as indicated by the shear map. So the GFS seems to be initialized fairly well, but if you look really closely, based on the orientation of the winds, we do have a very small pocket of upper level ridging located directly over the disturbance at the current time. And as we advance this into the 48-hour time frame, notice how we have a pretty good pocket of upper level ridging over the eastern Gulf of Mexico, and this little pocket of ridging extends into the southwest Gulf as well. But if this tropical system is located anywhere around here in the central Gulf, and we'll show the surface in a minute, it currently has the low pressure center a bit closer toward the southeast Louisiana coastline. This could be favorable enough for at least some slight or slow and steady intensification of a purely tropical system. Once again, we will have to keep a very close watch on this developing disturbance, but as of right now, the primary threat appears to be heavy rainfall and definitely quite some flooding here, especially if the system were to stall very close to the coastline. Again, this is now the surface representation from the GFS model. And you can see over the next 6 to 12 hours, it expects the low center to be located somewhere in the central Gulf of Mexico. As we get more into the 24 to 48 hour time frame, we see that much like the CMC, the GFS appears to be showing a developing tropical storm just to the south of the Louisiana coastline. And notice this very strong pocket of thunderstorm activity here. So if this were to sit along the Gulf Coast for quite a long time, then that will definitely raise the concerns for some very high rainfall totals and the chance of flooding, especially if this were to set up across New Orleans, because we all know about them being below sea level, so that is something that will also have to be considered. And sadly enough, if we go ahead and advance this throughout the next 72 to 96 hours, notice that the GFS, unlike the CMC, is keeping this low center directly over the central Gulf Coast. So this is a slightly different take on things. This would cause quite a lot of flooding anywhere from central Louisiana eastward to as far west as southeast Alabama and the western half of the Florida Panhandle. Based on the GFS track forecast, the latest precipitation estimates from the GFS model are indicating a wide swath of 4 to 10 inches of precipitation over the next 5 days, as you can see, around much of the central Gulf Coast. And some of these darker colors here closer to the Mississippi Sound are denoting areas that could receive in excess of 10 to 15 inches. And again, the model is not even showing the storm kicking out beyond day 5, so the rainfall chances or the rainfall totals could even be higher if you were to believe the GFS and take it word for word, because it really doesn't show much in the way of any type of movement throughout 7 days into the future. The last dynamical model we will look at is the European. This is the latest 12Z run. As we go into day 1 and day 2, we can see that the model is clearly showing steady intensification into a subtropical or tropical storm located just to the south of Lake Charles. And as we go into day 3 and day 4, notice that the ridge to the north of it that was originally there has broken down thanks to this long wave trough that's now beginning to come into the Great Lakes. But the model is indicating that this trough will not deepen quite enough to fully pick up our system. And the European is unlike the other models in that it allows it to sit just off the Louisiana coast. And this particular model is actually developing the system into a minimal hurricane. And also, one thing that is also dissimilar from the GFS is that this trough is expected to bypass the storm, at least on this model, and therefore this ridge over Texas is eventually going to build back in, and therefore the storm gets shunted more toward the west into the lower Texas coast as we go into days 7 through 9. So the bottom line is that I expect 93L Invest to develop into subtropical or tropical storm Lee as it continues to move in the general direction of the northwest. And as we go into the middle and second part of this weekend, I fully expect the storm to still be located right along the Texas or Louisiana coast, somewhere up in here. And depending on what the upper level conditions are like, this could have the chance to develop into a minimal hurricane, although a tropical storm that is highly sheared is still looking a fairly bit more likely than a hurricane at this time, and therefore some of the highest precipitation could be located just to the east of the center, and we can't exactly pinpoint exactly where the highest precipitation totals are going to be just yet. Of course, the storm is just now beginning to form, so there's a lot of things that we'll still have to monitor over the next 24 hours and see how it comes together. But all interest from the lower Texas coast all the way, once again, through Pensacola and Fort Walton Beach, everyone along here need to be paying attention to the tropics as we go into this Labor Day weekend, and the main threat as we go into early next week will be the chance of flooding. Now, very quickly, Tropical Storm Katilla is currently no threat to land, although it is continuing to show signs of intensification. The latest visible and infrared imagery indicates that the strongest convection is located directly near that low-level surface circulation, and the upper-level environment out ahead of the storm still looks to be supportive for this to develop into a hurricane and more than likely a major hurricane, and that is exactly what the latest Hurricane Center forecast is expecting. As of the 5 p.m. track, we see that the storm is still expected to become a major hurricane on Sunday into Monday, but the good news, of course, is that the troughing over the western Atlantic is still expected to persist, so there should be no threat to the interest in the eastern Caribbean other than some very high waves potentially as we get deeper into the weekend and into early next week. And in terms of any U.S. East Coast impact, it still looks as like we will have a lot of western Atlantic troughing next week, so that is the main reason why the models are showing a continued northwesterly track that should eventually take this storm more toward the north and out to sea. But again, this is a really extended 5 to 10 day forecast, so we will still continue to keep a close watch on things for you here at 28storms.com. So that sums up your tropical weather update for this evening. Please stay tuned to our 28storms.com webpage along with our Facebook and YouTube for more extensive updates. And as always, if you're on the go, you can now check us out at the Hurricane Tracker app available on the iPhone and iPad.